Hi all, my name is Steve Bromage. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you all here to what is going to be a fascinating and important conversation. Maine Historical Society is very pleased to be partnering with the University of Maine Alumni Association to bring you this program tonight. The personal stories that Amy Banks and Isaac Knapper are going to share with us tonight cut right to the core of one of the most important dialogues of our time in this moment. How does Maine fit into the national dialogue about race? That topic will be the subject of MHS's upcoming exhibition, Begin Again, Reckoning with Intolerance in Maine, which will open in our gallery and online in May, late May. If you are interested in these topics, I also want to let you know that we have two outstanding Zoom programs we will be hosting in May with author historian Edward Ball, who has a recent book about New Orleans, and scholar Eddie Glaude Jr., who really helped inspire the approach to this exhibition. So this is an ongoing discussion and dialogue that we're really pleased to be participate in with you. Before we get into tonight's story, though, I do want to welcome and give our partner from UMaine, John Diamond, a chance to greet you. So, John, to you.
Thanks so much, Steve and Kathleen, and hi, everybody. So pleased that you're able to join us. The Alumni Association is very pleased to be co-hosting this event tonight. For those of our viewers who were at the University of Maine during the 1970s and even in the 1960s, it's very likely that you had Dr. Ron Banks as a professor. I know I did as a graduate of the class of 1977. I had him for Maine history. And somewhere in my book collection, I still have the textbook that he authored. He was very well respected on campus and around the state. No surprise there. And his murder in 1979 was a real shock to so many people. And it's a conversation point with many people when they get together, reflecting back on what the University of Maine was like and what the experience of the University of Maine was like for those who were in attendance. I'm also pleased that not only is the Maine Historical Society doing the series that Steve just outlined, but I'm also pleased that the events of the past year have really awakened a lot of people and a lot of organizations, including our own, the Alumni Association, to our responsibility to get involved to address issues of racial equity and social justice. And when we first learned about Amy and Isaac's book becoming available, we realized that it would be a great opportunity for us to add this to the programming that we have been doing for the last year as part of our racial and social justice series. So I do want to welcome all of you, not just those of you who are UMaine alums, but others who have an interest in both the history of Maine and the history of this particular situation, this instance. And I, like so many of you, are looking forward to reading Amy's and Isaac's book when it comes out in November, and also, of course, pre-ordering it as soon as possible. So again, thank you.
Thanks very much, John. We really appreciate Dr. Banks was such an important part of Maine and the university and team and environment, so we really appreciate that. So as an historian and part of Maine Historical Society, I had long known about the seminal contributions that University of Maine history professor Ronald Banks made to our understanding of Maine history. As John mentioned, he wrote the seminal book about how Maine became a state, which was published back in 1971, right when Maine was not celebrating its bicentennial, but its 150th, just to put things in perspective. I knew too that he had been tragically murdered in 1979 while attending, of all things, a history conference in New Orleans. And so that was about kind of what I knew about his stories. As Maine Historical was approaching Maine's bicentennial in 2020, we were committed to using the occasion to both exploring statehood, obviously an important part of the bicentennial, but also to really looking at using the bicentennial moment to really deeply consider how Maine became the place it is today. And that's this wonderful sense of place we have, but it's also all of the things that make up our economy and our social environment and our social climate, and using it as a chance to really kind of unpack some really challenging issues. That led to a major exhibition in 2019, Holding Up the Sky, to consider the 13,000-year history of the Wabanaki as essential context for understanding Maine and Maine statehood. It also led to the republication of Banks' classic book, here's the modern bicentennial edition, and to my meeting Banks' daughter, Amy. When she and I connected, probably first, I'm I'm losing all sense of time because of the pandemic, probably a year or so ago. I was fascinated as she told me the details of her experience, Isaac's story, and the relationship that the two had formed. And it struck me as just so tied to this question of, again, how does Maine fit into this national dialogue about race? Here we are as perceived as a white state up here in the fringe. And so people ask, how does white privilege play out here, and other such things? And my conversations with Amy really stimulated a lot of thought that I think we're going to get into tonight. So with that, I'd like to step back and I'd like to introduce Amy Banks and Isaac Knapper to tell you their story. So Amy and Isaac, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Isaac, I'll jump in first if that's okay.
Yes, cool.
It's good. So first I have to say, this is being held today on April 12th. It's the 42nd anniversary of my father's murder. And when Steve and I were sort of talking about what, a time to talk in the spring, what would be good, I thought this would be sort of the perfect complete circle in whatever kind of warped circle one can make out of this story, I have to say. But it's also the first time in 42 years that I have not absolutely dreaded this day. And as I was sitting down to think about, God, what would I even share? There's our story, which Isaac and I will share together, tag teaming. But I was thinking about how ironic it is that I'm not dreading April 12th this year, because I actually get to introduce, many people from my state of Maine, the state that my father loved so dearly, to Mr. Isaac Knapper, who is now a dear friend. He's an inspiration to me, and really an ally in helping educate folks about the harm being done routinely in the American system of justice. So I am still stunned to actually be sitting here and talking with folks tonight, and actually looking at, my co-author, Isaac Knapper. Our story is stunning, and it remains surreal, I think, to me and even to Isaac. Unfortunately, it's not unique. Okay. And though we're not going to get into a lot of the statistics around wrongful conviction, do know that since 1989, there have been 2,729 people exonerated, with over 25,000 years of life lost. Right. So sometimes I think about, okay, we lost my father too young. He was 45. Certainly all of his kids know we lost him too young, but the kind of the atrocities that are happening in our justice system are really just staggering. And, my father's death was horrible, but it's part of a much bigger story that I think is important to tell. To me, what is actually unique about our story is our relationship, and how incredibly resonant it's been from the start, and how profoundly healing it has been to me. And I hope that you can get a taste of that during our conversation tonight. I'm going to switch. We have some slides, and we'll use the slides as sort of, stepping off points. So let me just get to my screen share. Give me a minute. I'm still getting used to all this kind of stuff. Hold on, get view. So this is the book that Isaac and I have written together, and I couldn't be prouder of it. The top of it is a quote by Jennifer Thompson. So for any folks that know the field of wrongful conviction, she is a woman that wrote a book with Ronald F called Picking Cotton. And I loved the blurb. She read our book and offered this blurb for our cover, which says, "Fighting Time is not just a book about the injustice of wrongful conviction, but a love story of the capacity of human beings to find power in the pain and healing in the harm." And I think that just so captures, the story that you're going to hear tonight. So one of the things that happened for anybody that's had a death or a tragic death, you end up holding on to whatever you can, right? One of the things that I held on to after my father died was his wallet, actually, that was with him at the time of his death. And at a certain point after, the dust had settled, so to speak, I looked through his wallet and came upon a quote that I thought was particularly important for these times, that my father carried around with him 24/7. It was in his wallet, and it was the Dante quote: "The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of moral crisis, preserve their neutrality." And I thought it so captured kind of where we are at this moment in time, trying to face kind of our racist past. So this is where the story begins. Our story begins on the left, for anybody who remembers me, and I do see some folks on the line that kind of knew me way back then when I was, I was preoccupied with basketball and sports. This is me at 16, 17 on the left. In Brewer High School on the right, you see Isaac Knapper, who he and I were the same age, which is part of the kind of compelling story that we have, but we were the same age. This, unfortunately, as you can see, I happen to be I'm free in a gym at Brewer High School. He, on the other hand, this is October of '79, is in prison. That tells you a lot about the story. So my dad, on the day that he died, April 12th, 42 years ago, left in the morning to go to the Organization of American Historians conference in New Orleans. He traveled a lot. That wasn't a big deal. He traveled both for business and, well, mostly for business. I don't remember him doing a lot for pleasure. I have such intense memories of him sitting at our dining room table, always with the blue books or working on his next book, right? So that's, my lasting impression of my dad. But basically flew down to New Orleans, checked into the Hyatt Regency, which was adjacent to the Superdome, and got settled, went out to dinner with his colleague, John Hackala, also a University of Maine professor. They had traveled together. They went out to a restaurant. I believe it was Sam Bourbon's. Don't think it's there anymore. And on their way back, as they were heading into the Hyatt Regency Hotel, they were held up by two, that's the thought, two Black men. In the scuffle that ensued, they were being robbed. The one right in front of my father actually had a pistol, and both my father and John Hackala struggled. John was pushed into the doorway. His glasses fell off, and he being the closest one other than my father to seeing whoever was the murderer, did not get a good look at the murderer. He could not identify the murderer at trial. My father was quoted as saying, "You've got to be kidding." And with that was shot point blank right in the face, and he was killed immediately, basically fell to the sidewalk. For people in Maine, this is how you probably got word of his murder. It was the front page in Portland Press Herald, Bangor Daily News, Camden Herald, wherever. It was front page everywhere. And it brings me to a little section that I want to talk about, which is Maine. Maine is the whitest state in the country, and it certainly was then. And racism wasn't in my mind a part of the story, right? Because of course, when you only have white people, you don't know how racism is a part of the story, right? I had met one Black person by the time I graduated from high school, and so the idea of white dominance was all there was, right? There was nothing else. And that is, that is where this event happened for us, right? So my father dies. What happened was that evening, about 11 o'clock at night, the doorbell rings, and there's Bob Hancock, Charlie Scontris, again, colleagues for a lot of people, Joanne Scontris, came to our house to tell my mom. They were told, and they needed to tell my mom. I was awoken to just, ear piercing screaming. It was horrific, as were the next 35 years. But what happened almost immediately is that the DA and folks in New Orleans just started feeding us information, okay? And we were just perfect for it. This was, two Black men, from the projects. They just started hammering us. We were terrified. We didn't know how to think about this. And we absolutely believed that the DA system was looking out for our best interest and helping us to have justice served. And, in the book, I say, it wasn't even that we wanted to believe it, our sanity believed it, right? Our lives were just thrown apart. We wanted to believe it, and we needed it for our sanity. In May, this is a picture from the Bangor Daily News, and Isaac, I'll turn this over to you in just a sec. This is a picture from the Bangor Daily News. Nobody had told us that there was an arrest that I recall, but I woke up to see this image: Isaac Knapper on the right, John Dillman on the left. And so all of a sudden, in our eyes, this was the man who had murdered our father, period. He was arrested. The detective said it. The DA assured us. They told us he had an extensive juvenile record. He was a bad guy, a bad egg. They've been trying to get him on and on and on and on. All of that, or most of that, was just simply not true. And we didn't know. So Isaac, you want to share with folks the arrest? I mean, what happened to you?
Yes. Well, thank you, Amy, and hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Isaac Knapper, and that's me on that picture right there. I was 16 years old when they come to my mother's house to arrest me for the murder of Dr. Banks. And I didn't know what was going on. In fact, I was asleep when the detectives came to the house, beating on the door, and my mom let them in, and they just barged past my mother and came to all the rooms looking in the bed, and they just pointed guns at me and told me get up. And my mom said, "What are y'all doing?" And she didn't know what was going on, and they said, "Well, he's charged with murder." Murder, my mother said, and I looked at them, murder. I didn't understand what was going on either. So when they took me down and wouldn't let me put on clothes. My mom had to bring these clothes to central lockup that I have on right now because they arrested me with my underwear on. And my mother came down, but I went through so much, not only physically, but mentally torture. They talked bad to me. They told me I killed a friend, and that I'm gonna get the electric chair because they didn't have the legal injection out at that time. It was the electric chair, and they was telling me that I'm gonna get electrocuted, and I need to own up to what I did. I need to confess, and I didn't know what was going on. And I said, "No, I don't know what's happening. What am I confessing to?" And it was like, "You killed this man." I said, "I didn't kill anybody. Where did that come from?" And so it went on, and for days and weeks, they would come get me out the little cell that they had me in. They had me in a juvenile cell at the time because I was 16, so they couldn't put me with the adults, but they put me in an adult prison. And they would come to my cell each and every day and try and get me to confess. They would cuff me up, drag me down the steps. They drug me 4 stories down the steps with my legs in the air, grabbing me by my feet and my head hitting each step all the way down to from 4th floor to the 1st floor. And they also put me in solitary confinement in an area that's where this picture here, where they fractured my ribs, and I'm in Charity Hospital in New Orleans on this picture. And they have one of my legs, my feet is handcuffed to the bed. And I was in the hospital for about 8 weeks for that surgery there, because they had to cut me. They had to take the blood clogs out of my body, and everything, where they beat me and continue to try and get me to confess. And I never would confess because and then they even come to me and they told me, "Well, we know who did it." And they gave me the name. They said Leroy Williams did it. And from what the eyewitness saying, Leroy Williams actually did this murder, but we need you to sign these state evidence stating that Leroy Williams committed the murder, and you've seen it. But I didn't see Leroy Williams. I didn't know what they was talking about, and I didn't want to sign no papers getting an innocent person in trouble for something he didn't do. So they went to Leroy with the same story. And they said, well, you can save yourself. All you have to do is say Isaac Knapper committed the murder. Because we know Isaac Knapper did it. And I mean, they reversed the thing, but they kept coming to me. They kept saying, we know Leroy did it. We just need you to sign. I said, well, I don't know. How could I sign some papers and I don't know what's going on? I mean, I don't know Leroy. I know Leroy Williams personally because he lives in the same project I live in, but I don't know if he committed that murder or not. You know? And so, but I mean, they would go on and on with the psychological abuse and the mental abuse, along with the physical abuse, but I never would confess to something that I didn't know anything about.
Yeah, and you know, just to make sure people are absolutely clear, Isaac, I mean, one of the things that was so dramatic when Nancy and I first met you was sitting there and having you tell the story of literally this guy, Scarface and Dillman, coming in, literally putting a bag on your head with your arms cuffed and beating you, not beating your face, right? Because you don't do that, because then people would see, but beating your body. And the, you know, for folks to know, these, you know, the kind of damage, I mean, you literally thought you were going to die, right? And you could have. I mean, you've got chest tubes in there, for God's sakes, right?
Yeah, they put the bag, like you said, Amy, they put the bag over my head and they wouldn't touch my face because I guess to get a visit, my family can see my face and other people can see my face. So they just whoop my body. They kicked me in the body with boots on. They stomped me and they was throwing stuff at me. And they I mean, it was just terrible, absolutely terrible. And I never could understand why they would do something like that. And you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but they treated me like I was guilty.
Right, until proven innocent. This is a slide that I'm going to show people. This is the courthouse, the Orleans Parish Criminal Courthouse, where Isaac will tell you about his trial in just a few moments. But off to the left here, you can see the Orleans Parish Prison. This is where you were held, right, Isaac, in 1979. And I sort of feel like this is a place where so much happened because it was where Isaac was held. It was where his trial was held. Literally, that's where he was convicted of murder. And it ended up being the place that Isaac and I and Denise, his wife, and my sister Nancy and Lori White, who will come into the picture later, all gathered to meet at the first time, literally right outside where Isaac had been convicted of murder. This is the from the front. And you can see Nancy. Nancy's out in the audience somewhere. I hope you don't mind. I put a little sign there for you, Nancy. But again, the courthouse. And as Nancy and I, the day that we actually had arrived, we were walking around, and I just was so struck by this idea: the impartial administration of justice is the foundation of liberty. That was what was on the building, right? So to the building, they were clear that impartial administration of justice was the foundation. However, what was going on in the building was a whole different story. And I want to just show you a couple of slides of this because, you know, while wrongful conviction is an issue everywhere in our country, there's no state that is exempt from it. New Orleans around this time had a particularly problematic DA and Harry Connick Sr. He was the district attorney from 1973 to 2003. He was somebody, there had been a number and have been a number of wrongful convictions that are related back to his time. And he's been criticized for it. And actually he had been, and then it was taken to the Supreme Court. And this just gives you a flavor, these next three slides, of the kind of district attorney system that Isaac was going into to try to get a fair trial for his life. Obviously you can read this, but I'll do it. So here he is talking about the criticism of him. He says, my reputation is based on something other than a case or two cases or five cases or one interception. I don't know why he goes into sports metaphors, right? But even as a sports person, I'm thinking, not appropriate. Or 20 interceptions. Look at the rest of my record. I have more yards than anybody, Connick said. Would you make it the legacy of Hank Aaron or Babe Ruth? that they struck out a lot, he went on. I have to look at myself and say, this is who I am. This is what I've done. Perfect? No, but I've done nothing to go to confession about in that office at all. Some beg to differ, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who wrote this. So she declared that Connick's office, this is the whole area, the whole district attorney's office, was deliberately indifferent to Brady versus Maryland. That's the high court ruling that requires the state to turn over exculpatory evidence. She wrote that the office's instruction on Brady and similar court rulings amounted to little more than 4 sentences in a manual, that Connick himself misunderstood the law, and that his cavalier attitude spurred a culture of inattention to defendants' rights. This is one way that systemic racism shows up. He rebuts that by saying, to suggest a criminal lawyer in my office didn't know of their obligation to turn over Brady material is absurd. It is such a naive statement, Connick said. I can't attribute malice to those decisions as some people do, as the dissenters in the Supreme Court do, particularly Ginsburg. It reaches a level of hysteria. What's burning in that woman is a very liberal flame that doesn't contemplate the whole picture. Again, I mean, just horrific. Isaac, you want to share what the trial was like? I didn't go, my brother and my uncle went, and so we certainly heard stories about it, but share for folks what it was like.
Yeah, the trial was it was like kangaroo court. It was one-sided, and I had about 12 witnesses stated where I was at the time that they said the murder was committed. And but they had one witness that turned state evidence, which was the guy Leroy Williams, who I mentioned earlier. They used and they coerced his testimony, and they had him to say what they wanted him to say in order to get a lighter sentence and to convict me for first-degree murder. So the trial, 16 years old, I wasn't fully developed in the mind. And as far as the law concerned, I didn't know anything about the justice system. And I just thought maybe justice would be served and they would find out that I'm an innocent boy at the time. So, and I had confidence they would find out that I'm innocent. So I was waiting on this trial to take place to go home, to be with my family. But I was completely wrong. They railroaded me. Even my attorney, my lawyer, he wouldn't talk with me. He never spoke with me. After the trial was over, I didn't see him. He didn't come say anything to me. He went to the victim's family and hugged them and everything, and asked them, was they satisfied? And it was like he wanted me railroaded also. It was like he was a part of it. He was part of the conspiracy, part of what was going on. And everything in there seemed to be against me. And I couldn't understand why. My family was crying, and they was like taking it real hard when they said guilty, first-degree murder. And it was like my mind just went blank. I was like numb. And when they brought me back on a tier in a jail cell where I was housed at, and a bunch of inmates in there they knew I had been to trial, and it was like, what happened? What happened? What happened? And I didn't know what to say. I just, went to the cell, and my head was just banging, and I couldn't understand. And they said guilty. And so some of the guys, I guess these were some guys that's used to it, that had experience with the law. And they was like, man, you finna get a life sentence if they don't give you the electric chair. And it was just, I don't know. I didn't know what to take from that. Like I said, my mind was just foggy, and thinking about my mom, how, looking at her face, seeing the reaction that she gave in the courtroom when they said guilty, you know. My sister shouted real loud, and the judge, she said, "Get her out of my courtroom right now." And she had a nervous breakdown, and they got her out the courtroom, and it was just so much chaos, you know, and one-sided.
Yeah. And then they did, in fact, right, as I recall, I don't know if you remember this, Isaac, but it had to be, for you to get the electric chair, it had to be unanimous. And so there was like one vote shy or something, right? And so
Right.
you ended up going to Angola for life. And let me just say a couple of words about Angola, and then you can share, you know, Isaac, your experience. But for folks who in Maine, we didn't know this, right? Angola State, well, the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola at the time was known as the bloodiest prison in America, for very good reason. And Isaac will share some of that. But I mean, essentially, this used to be actually a plantation. And this picture that is Angola, the Angola Fields in 1982, that was in the Times-Picayune, you can see, I mean, it doesn't look that much different than a plantation now, right? But it was brutal. So Isaac, you want to share kind of, man, and I'll, as you're talking, I'll forward the slides to some of the other ones too, okay?
Yeah, the field, that's working in the field, and the field is cruel and unusual punishment. You're supposed to be in the field for 90 days without a write-up, without a disciplinary report, and they would take you out of the field and they would give you a job on a compound somewhere, because we had to walk miles and miles to the field. And once you get out there, you have to start working. You walk back in the horse. The guy on the horse is the guard. They will follow you. But they would wait when you get 89 days, and they would write you up for no reason at all. Just, it has to start over again, because you have to get 90, you have to complete 90 days without a write-up. And they would, like I said, the field farmers, that's what we call them, field farmers. They will wait till you get, they keeps up with your 90 days. They know when you get close to 90, and they want to keep you in the field. Because everybody goes in the field, you're gonna be in the field at least a little over a year before they decide, well, we'll let his 90 days, we'll let him get 90 days and 9, because they, you know, other inmates come into the prison. So, but they want to keep the field crowded and keep it enough people out there. And they had hundreds of guys out there in the field. This is just one field line right here, but there has about maybe 50 different areas like this here with different inmates. Because the prison, it houses like close to 7,000 inmates. So you got hundreds of inmates in each line that's working. And they do all kind of work. They dig ditches, pick cotton. And when you talked about the book, Picking Cotton, it made me think about, you know, what they does in Angola.
Right.
Now this is a cell block. And I was in this cell block right here on this picture. I was in cell 8. That's where we would be housed at in a block. It was two inmates to a cell at that time. And we would watch TV, you know, we would go on the rec yard. They would call rec. And you have the opportunity to go if you want to. If you don't have to, but that was supposed to be part of the, I guess.
Yeah. And then, yeah, the weapons. I mean, my God.
Yes. Now this is the shanks and the weapons. They call them shanks, but they have what you call that, machetes and all that they make. They make these weapons at the prison. They have an area where they make the license plates for the cars, for the vehicles outside the prison. And they use the same machine that they cut the license plates with to cut steel and to make knives. So you had a knife of choice. Everybody had knives. And that's the reason why it was known as the bloodiest prison in America, because they had knives and they had zip guns. Like you see these little guns up here, they made them, they would make guns that shoot real bullets. but they call them zip guns, you know, and so they had every weapon that you can imagine in prison.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, I mean, how many, I mean, I'm thinking about like how often you've told me stories about, you know, this person, and certainly they're in the books, this person who was just stabbed sitting at the table, or, you know, that this was such a routine occurrence, and, you know, that the guards wouldn't intervene. They would just let the, you know, inmates do what they're going to do.
Yeah, well, you know, the guards, their job is not to put their life on the line. They would, if you, these guys, 90% of them is serving a life sentence, so they feel like they would never be free. And they don't mind killing you for anything, because they're just gonna get another life sentence. They'll go on extended lockdown for about 3 years, and then they put them right back in general population. You know, you got guys that then killed 3 and 4 people in prison and go on lockdown, come right back in general population, and they'll do it again at a blink of an eye. So, and the guards won't stop them at all. The guards will step back and say, go ahead, finish, kill him. They'll even tell you, kill him. I don't want to touch you. Just when you finish, then you just come on with me. You know, they won't even grab your shank. They'll let you walk with your knife in your hand till they get you to the isolation.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I've always it kept in my head is sort of watching Isaac's and my trajectory, right? So here you can see Isaac ended up serving 13 years of his life sentence in Angola, which is, you know, which is a lifetime, quite frankly, with what you were up against, right? I mean, you said nobody really slept, and I'm thinking, so in those formative years, and for anybody who's got kids or our kids or whatever, imagine, so from the age of 16 to 29, almost 30, this is what the primary developmental force is in your life, right? Is trying to stay alive and trying not to get killed and keeping an eye on, you know, people you care about, whatever. During that time, I got to finish high school. I got to go to college. I got to go to medical school. I got to do my residency, you know. So when Isaac was being released, you know, and we'll move to that next, you know, his trajectory was he got to survive Angola. I got to build a life, right? I mean, that's one of the, you know, just crazy parallels, I think, that is so heartbreaking for me when I think about, you know, what's the two lives in what happened, Isaac. So then we get to the part of the story. So as I remember, Isaac, you tried to appeal, nothing was happening. And then, you know, share with people when Lori White came on board.
Yeah, Lori, she was a former prosecutor, but she was still in school at the time, and she was much younger. And she visited me, and I asked Lori, I said, why would you want to come help? Because she offered to help me. And I asked why. She said, because I read about your case in the district attorney's office, and like many cases, she said, I believe that you are innocent, and I would like to work on your case if you would give me the opportunity. And I recall telling Lori, I said, well, I don't have any money. She said, you don't need any money. Mm-hmm. You know? And she worked on my case. She and another guy that was an inmate in prison serving 198 years. He was called the inmate lawyer, inmate counselor. And he worked on the case along with Lori. She would come visit me and him, and they would go through the paperwork and the transcript and everything. They would file it together, and until they proved, you know, that it was possible that I could not have committed that murder. And I mean, Lori was on the case, and she was into it real heavy. She was, I mean, I would get letters when she didn't come visit me. She would travel to Angola at least once a week. She would come like on a Friday and call me out for attorney visit. And we would talk, and she'll show me some of the other errors in the case, in the transcript, and we would talk about it. And meet her in Borough, but
Yeah. And so one of the things, you know, that again, when my family was finding out what happened, and I will say more about that in a while, is that one of the primary things that 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 allowed you to be released is a discovery of this Dillman report, right? And apparently Burrell, who was the jailhouse lawyer, right, actually said, Isaac, you need to get the police report. And Isaac was like, you know, there's no police report. He said there has to be every you know trial or every case has a police report. And in one of the best parts of this story, your mom actually was able to get this police report that nobody had seen, right?
right.
Because basically Isaac's mom can do anything. She's incredible. But so she gets this, Dillman report. Okay. And I want to show people. So lest you think that this was, a little of this, a little of that. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to show you this. This is the actual Dillman report. And there are a couple of things that I want to point out. So first of all, what and the Dillman report was not turned over to the defendants. So this should have been exculpatory evidence that got Isaac off to be right from the get-go. And essentially, like in this frame, you see that there was another Sergeant Italiano, that had was at the scene of another robbery 1 block from where my father was murdered, and he very specifically says the people they arrested fit the description of the kids that killed my father, including one of them wearing a sailor's hat. And you don't need to, this is just to show that I have it. And not only that, but the gun that they used to rob another couple had 5 bullets in it, 1 bullet missing, and that 1 bullet that missing matched the ballistics of the bullet that killed my father. Okay, this was the exculpatory evidence. Essentially, this was the group of guys that should have been arrested. Essentially, for my father's murder, it was left out. And so once this came to light, and here you see the chrome-plated pistol. Once that came to light, it was almost like nothing. I mean, so you can describe what it was like to get out of jail, Isaac, right?
Yeah. But those guys, it got off. I've always wondered why they didn't charge them, and they was caught with the murder weapon and everything. But anyway, getting out of prison was wow. It was, I mean, it's hard to explain and express the feelings that I had, because it was so emotional. And because for so many years, I didn't believe I was against the system, period, because people was telling me and getting in my head and was telling me things that was going to happen before it happened. Because I guess these guys had experienced it beforehand, and it was telling me, man, you can't. I mean, you may be innocent, but they're gonna find a way to get you and say you're guilty, because they want to clean the books up. They want to get somebody for that murder. And I said, yeah, but I'm innocent. Yeah, I know you're innocent, man. But and so for a long time, I had given up. I was like, wow, they'll never let me out of this prison. And I was looking at other guys that had been there for so many years, like Mose Murray, Jerome Riley, Montana, all these different guys that I met in prison that had been there like 25, 30, 35, and 40 years. And so they was accused of murder also, and most of them was guilty for the murders. And so and I was like, well, if they keeping these people here, they're gonna keep me here too, because I'm serving the same sentence that they serving. But boy,
yeah, right. So you are released, and you continue. Actually, one of the things that we didn't mention is that Isaac had been a Golden Gloves boxer before he went to prison. So again, you talk about losses. I mean, part of the, Isaac, your story of loss is that you had a real live boxing future ahead of you, right? And that you kind of moved into when you were released. And, but you were also a champion within the prison system for 9 years, right? So you kept boxing and probably it kept you alive, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So what, go ahead, Isaac, I'm sorry, cutting you off.
Yeah, well, boxing was, like you said, I was already Golden Glove champion and Silver Glove champion, and I was training for the Junior Olympics when I got arrested. And so when I went in prison, I didn't want to box when I got there, but they told me boxing was big in the ward, and you would get special privileges if you was a boxer. And so, but I still didn't want to do it because I was angry for being there for a crime I didn't commit. And I know I love boxing. It was my first love and something I always wanted to do. And so it was hard for me not to participate. So after a year, another guy finally convinced me. He said, "Man, you need to come onto the gym and work out. That would help a little bit, ease your mind sometime. It would relieve some of that tension." And when I went to the gym and I worked out for the first day, I hit on the bag and everything, and it relieves a whole lot of pressure. And so I say that was my way of escaping reality. And it helped me to compose my sanity. I would go to the gym and work out and work out and work. And I think that played a big role in me being as good as I was in prison. I only lost one boxing match in prison. I had 368 boxing matches there. And so I was a champ in like 4 different weight divisions. And, and like I said, I mean, that was my way of escaping until justice was served.
Yeah. So then so one of the things, if we bounce back to my family's story, is that, so Isaac was released and nobody told us. That's what the point of this slide, that silence is a lot more than you'd think, right? No one told our family that Isaac had been released from prison. So we were up in Maine, scattered now. A lot of us had gone to college, or all of us had gone to college or whatnot. And we had no idea. So for 13 more years, we thought justice had been served, and, it was like this painful, horrible thing, but oh well. And then in 2004, so Isaac is doing his life, we're trying to move on with our life. In 2004, this is Gary Perkinson. He happens to be my brother-in-law. And I call this Gary and the Missing K, because Gary's an editor, and he's often looking up people and things just to see, how people are doing, whatever. And he had Googled Isaac before, but hadn't spelled his name right. Knapper is spelled with a K, and he had just done the Napper. So all of a sudden, imagine this, 2004, he's married to my sister. He Googles Isaac Knapper, and all of a sudden, all of this information comes up about how Isaac has been released from prison. He's, been, kind of really celebrated in New Orleans as, somebody who had been done wrong to in the prison system. And Gary sees this and is like, oh shit, what do I do with this, right? I mean, this is horrible. So he shares it with family. And, basically then my sister Nancy comes in. So at this point, my sister, Dr. Nancy Banks, she was getting her PhD in history at Columbia, actually. And I had, by this time, I think 6-year-old twins, when I was working, whatever. So Nancy kind of took it upon herself to really try to find out what had happened. She reached out to, the DA's office, the police department, victims advocates, because, that someone should know something about this and to help us with this. And come to find out, it was no surprise that this kind of thing happened all the time in Louisiana. No one could find the case file. No one, this was one of many, many very complicated stories in New Orleans. We basically got nowhere with it, other than having a couple of articles printed, but it wasn't going to be opened. And so we and so we were stuck with, okay, this story of our father's murder, to me anyway, just had gotten like a bazillion times worse, because now we've got this young boy, this guy, Isaac Knapper, who was wrongly convicted, right? So his whole family was pulled into this horrific event that so shaped our life. And it was, I mean, just sickening, just sickening. And so as 2005 rolled around, a couple of things happened. One was that Hurricane Katrina happened. And, you can see on the right here, this is the Louisiana Superdome, and that essentially the site of where my father was murdered. Everything was destroyed, right? And, I think my family just thought, I mean, that's the end of that, where this is going to remain an unsolved murder, unresolved issues in our life, just going to be more pain, so be it, right? I also happened to get cancer at that time, so our family kind of was very much focused on that. And then 10 years passed, okay, another 10 years passed. And this is kind of where we'll move the story to when we meet, before we kind of move on to questions. But so 10 years passed, and I'm a psychiatrist. And, one of the things that I had known, I specialize in treating trauma. And one of the things that I had been taught and could see is that when, one of the risks of having your own children become your age when something traumatic happens is that it starts building inside of you. And it's exactly what happened. These are my two kids that obviously I love and adore, Alex and Jamie. And as they were turning the same age as Isaac and I were when the murder happened, all of it, the feelings, I could see how young they were. All of a sudden they're that young, and I could see Isaac and I, and it was just too much. And I thought, I've got to do something. So what I decided to do one night, we were in Pennsylvania, and I decided to send an email. I looked up Lori White. This is Lori and Isaac around that time. I looked up Lori White, and she had now become a judge. And there was a nondescript email like lawyer at NOLA dot blah, blah, blah. I didn't say Lori White anyway, but it was associated with her account. And I sent an email, introduced myself as Dr. Banks's daughter, and just said, hey, listen, I'm just trying to get some information. I'd love to talk to you. And because I had sent it to this nondescript email, I just thought, okay, where's this going? Well, come to find out, she got back to me in literally within less than 24 hours. And we started this conversation where back and forth, an email, and then we talked on the phone. Somewhere in it, she was the one that suggested, oh, you should write a book about this. And I was like, well, I don't know about that. You should, but I said, do you think Isaac would meet me? I would love to meet him. And she said, should check. And so she checked, and his response, I'll never forget this, Isaac, because the way she said it was, her response was that you said, I'll meet them if it will help. And I was so struck by that, right? Here, you could have been like running for the hills, for God's sakes, with this story and this thing that had so, kind of marred your life, but you were like so open and so generous. And, anyway, do you want to share a little bit of, what it was like for you to hear that I had reached out to you?
Yeah, when Judge Lori called me and she asked me, she said, Isaac, would you like to meet Dr. Banks' daughters? They want to meet you. And I said, Dr. Banks, and she was like, it's up to you. You don't have to answer right now. You can call back and talk to me later, let me know, and I'll get in touch with them and give them the answer. Said, it's up to you. And I said, I don't mind. I said, if it would help anything, I don't mind meeting them. And so she made it happen. I think she got in touch with you, Amy.
Yep.
And they set a date and everything to meet in her judge chambers. Yep. And me and my wife, Denise, and I, we went down when Lori called, and I was excited to meet Amy and Nancy, and especially Nancy, because I had read in the paper when the crime was committed that she was 8 years old, and I used to think about her all the time. I said, wow, what could she be going through? A baby, 8 years old, just lost her father. So Nancy was constantly on my mind so much. And I mean, the 13 years that I was gone, I don't think it was a full day went by that I didn't think about Nancy, being a baby like that, and what she must have gone through. So when I got the opportunity and we met and I laid eyes on him, it was magical. I mean, when I asked Nancy, could I get a hug? And when we embraced each other, that's when all the emotions came out. Tears just started falling from everybody.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to let her go,
Yeah.
because I thought about her so long and so many years, and what she may have went through being a baby, 8 years old. That's a baby, and it was like, I mean, and she held me and I held her, and we all just cried, I think, Amy.
Yeah. Let me embellish that a little bit, because you're that, to me, that has been, and I say this to the day, the most transformative moment actually of my life and healing of my life. So everybody, imagine we're sitting in the judge's quarters, and Isaac has just shared with Nancy and I, these horrendous stories of what it was like to first be in Angola, in the beating and all of that. And we're up to here. And the other thing is, people from Maine will appreciate that, we're stoic. We kind of suck it up and we go along, right? My mother's favorite kind of refrain was, if you don't laugh, you cry, right? So we're all laughing all the time, right? Rather than crying. And so, Nancy and I are, we don't talk about this, what had happened to our family a lot. And so there was a bit of a pause, and Isaac's wife, Denise, said, so what was it like for you guys, right? And, Nancy and I kind of look at each other and we're hemming and hawing, and said, well, it was terrible and blah, blah, blah. And, and I said something like, well, Nancy was just 8, and Isaac, without missing a beat, starts sharing his real lived experience of remembering Nancy at that age, right? And that he wanted to come and help her, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like starting to tear up. I look at my sister, who's got her hand, face covered, just sobbing. And I thought, oh my God. And then, and I looked at Isaac again, and without missing a beat, Isaac, you were so present, and you just said, Nancy, can I give you a hug? Right? And that's when it was just so open and honest and vulnerable and just healing, right? Like right to the guts. This picture was shortly after that. I don't know if you can see some of the tears still, but it was just phenomenal. And then, so from there, so we have this amazing, I mean, and I have to say, Isaac, we're still amazed. It seemed just surreal that we even met, but the entire weekend. So we basically had this weekend, where then we talked about, Isaac had copies of he had written a memoir of about 400 pages, but also he had the transcript and the Dillman Report. So he picks us up the next day with Denise, you can see in the background. And here we are, like we went to Kinko's Copies and just started photocopying all this stuff. We went out to lunch. Isaac took us to the gym. This was a picture of him pointing to himself when he was a young boxer. Here we are at Isaac's gym. I mean, these guys just incredibly generously shared, New Orleans, talked to us about what happened with Hurricane Katrina. I'm going to pass on him. And then the final, just surreal cubed thing that happened was that on the last day that we were there, we got a chance to go to Angola with Isaac and Lori White and Isaac's wife, and actually go to see where he was. And, here we are getting in the van. There's Nancy, here's Isaac in the van. And this was one of Isaac. This is your friend Michael, who's now out, but had been in, I think you told me at that point, 42 years.
Yes.
Yeah. So meeting, we had lunch there. I mean, and, there were a couple of moments, where I remember, Isaac, at one point we were walking down one area where you could see where you first went where you were first put when you got there in prison. And I remember you literally shaking and, saying to me, that's where I was when I first got here. And, I mean, it was so viscerally moving. And I want to, because I want to leave some time for questions. But I don't know, do you want to say anything about that trip, Isaac, to Angola before we move on?
Well, I mean, it was kind of nervous going back in there, but seeing my friend Michael right here, I was happy to see Michael, and I was happy that y'all had an opportunity to meet Michael, because he was still serving a life sentence right there. And now he's home. He made parole. He's on a life sentence probation. And he's another guy that I believe in my heart. I feel like I knew he was innocent for the crime that they accused him of also. But he's home now, and he calls me every day. He don't miss a day calling to see how I'm doing, and he's still my best friend.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the other things that has been so touching for me, Isaac, is to see the friends that have left, right? The Archie Williams, to be able to meet those guys and hear, very similar story. So I want to read something brief. This is the ending of the book. Just quickly tell you kind of what we're doing now, and then we'll move to questions if that's okay. So, one of the things was, so we were leaving Angola, and it was like, God, where do we go from here, right? And actually, Nancy and I had driven out with Lori White, and Isaac and his wife drove Nancy and I to the airport. And this is the ending. So we drove back to New Orleans. Isaac finally pulled his Lexus up to the curb outside the airport, then helped us carry our bags into the terminal. I was surprised by the emotion I felt, by the connection to this man who had been in my life for some 36 years. It seemed impossible to let go, to move forward with no clear plan for how to maintain the connection, unsure of what the impact had been on him, but knowing clearly that this had changed me, that it had healed me at the very center of my being. We hugged once, twice, 3 times. And when we finally parted, I could see in his eyes that he too was having a hard time saying goodbye. As a parting gift, he said simply, "It feels like I'm saying goodbye to family." And at that moment, I knew that we'd be okay, that we wouldn't lose each other, because we had both lost so much already in ways over which we had no control. Family. It's such a simple word that describes a built-in sense of belonging. Some families you're born into, others you choose, and still others, in rare cases, you're thrust into. Our lives, so disparate in every way, blew up together on April 12th, 1979. And in many ways, we've all been spiraling out of control, fighting to steady ourselves against the power of that explosion. And finally, through the years, through the pain, through the losses, as our lives whirled by each other's, we reached out a hand, touched each other, and simply held on. And we keep holding on, don't we, Isaac? I mean,
Right.
We keep holding on. We have, in 2019, our first presentation together was at Nancy's school, Fieldston, the Ethical Cultural School, where we got a chance to talk to students. Here's Isaac talking with high school students at Fieldston about his experience, wrongful conviction. And, we wrote the book in order to convey the story, but not just the story. It's the healing, it's the change, it's helping to stimulate the conversations that really need to happen to help change what's going on in our country, and has been for 450 years. This is a picture at a restaurant after the event with, as you can see, there's Gary of the Missing K, Nancy, my sister Nancy, Isaac's wife, Denise, me, and Isaac. I'm just going to leave that up there. I encourage everybody to please share our story. We'll open it up for questions now, but please do share our story. And this this is happening too frequently, and there are so many derivations of the abuse that are happening in the justice system. And I'm just hoping folks will join us in trying to make some change here. Anything you'd like to finish with, Isaac?
I just want to say I hope they will go out and get the book and not just read it, but I mean, just take heed of what's being said, because everything is true, is well documented, and I just hope that it would help as many people, because they have so many people in the world that's going through same things, and this is a must read book, and I want to thank everybody for being a part of it.
Yeah, me too. And our emails are there. Certainly, if anybody feels like reaching out to, I think, either one of us, feel free to. And we'll turn it back to you, Steve.
Amy and Isaac, I cannot tell you how much and I think on behalf of everybody, appreciate your grace and your generosity in sharing this profound experience, this shared experience you've had. I think, in the world we work of history, there's nothing more powerful in relating as human beings than this connection and this humanity. And what you have both been through your whole lives and what you've shared with us has such power, I think, to inspire and inform. And, I'm just struck, I think this moment in time we're at in this country, the question is, what can each of us individually do? And how do we respond? And how do we fit into this story? And, it's funny, I think sometimes less words are more. And I'm not sure how much conversation we even need after this, but I think the power, what you have given us, is the sense of the importance of vigilance, and are all being attentive to the world and the communities we're living in, and the issues and the dialogue that's happening. And I think you've given us a great gift in understanding and feeling the human impact of words, of actions, of vigilance, of lack of vigilance, of taking things for granted, of not paying attention and not participating. So I think you've given us a tremendous gift, and your, again, grace and generosity in sharing this is profoundly moving. And I'm really glad that this is recorded and that more people will be able to experience and see and learn more and read the book. So I just want to start with that thank you. I'm going to look back into the question chat, but I know one thing that has come up, questions we've gotten again and again. What was the follow up, with the police and on the people who actually did the crime? And, was there any consequences either for the police, the prosecutor's office, et cetera? And what was the, play that thread out for us, if you could, about just what happened after your release in terms of continued effort to convict the people who did it.
Yes, Lori White, attorney, she and Mike Reelman, another attorney, got together and they filed a lawsuit to try to sue the state of Louisiana, Detective John Dillman, Dave Patterson, Harris County office, and they was all immune to malicious prosecution, and they just made a mistake, and can't nothing be done about it except I have my freedom, and in fact that was the attitude that they had. They said, well, you got your freedom, what else you want? That's what they told me in court, and but I mean,
yeah. Let me jump in, Isaac.
Yes.
Yeah, let me jump in. I mean, so you guys also, you also ended up like 20 years later suing the prosecutor, right? Or trying to bring the prosecutor, Dave Patterson, up on charges. Right. And that was the first time that had ever been done in New Orleans. And that it didn't end up being successful. It wasn't like a jury or anything like that. It was like two businessmen and a lawyer or something that got together to kind of decide what had happened. But what I will say is that as part of our trip to New Orleans, Nancy and I, we actually met with Dave Patterson, who was the one of the DA, one of the prosecutors that convicted you. And we hadn't told him actually, and I did this purposely. I wanted to see what his reaction would be. We didn't tell him that we had just met Isaac or that we knew he had been, released right away or whatever. And at every step of our meeting, even though he was incredibly gracious and polite and, kind to my sister and I will honestly say, and this is an opinion, but I would say that at no point did it seem to me that he understood that Isaac Knapper was a person or that Leroy Williams was a person. And I kept trying to ask him about, well, what about the gun? And there would be, blanket statements of these guys, they share the guns all the time. So it didn't matter that it was at that one, in that one place. It was, so, and he told me repeatedly, I know we got the right guy. I'm sure to this day that it was Isaac Knapper who killed your father. I mean, there was no, so there wasn't any wiggle room there. There wasn't any conversation to be had. The other thing is, in terms of, there has never been any attempt to catch the killer. I've said this before, for me at this point, and actually for a long time, it's almost immaterial. For better or for worse, I think for better, the story for me has become, the healing in this relationship. And that really is what I choose to focus on. It wouldn't, at this point, it wouldn't help me in any way, maybe my other family members, but to actually have somebody else in jail for it, and of the people that we think did it, that were in that group, I know at least Derek Robertson is already dead, right? He was murdered. And, so, I mean, it's not clear that any of these folks are even around. Yeah.
Isaac, a couple people have asked, and I don't know that this is an answerable question, but where you have found this deep inner peace and calm and grace, it would be easy to be bitter and angry based on what has happened to you. And yet, clearly your generosity of spirit and the peace you seem to be with, can you imagine where that came from? Your family, your mother?
Yeah, I think that comes from my mother, because she's very, very spiritual in religion, and with her prayers, and along with my prayers, because I'm spiritual also. And I think praying and just meditate and allowing the spirit to control my emotions. So I don't have no bitter in my heart. And my thing is, like what I do now, it helps me a whole lot. I work with little kids, teaching them my skill of boxing, and we compete and travel, and that's where I spend most of my time at, with these kids and some adults that I train as well. But along with the prayers, that helps me not have bitter in my heart, because you're not supposed to hold that in your heart.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that has been so inspiring and healing to me, to see Isaac, how, to see you and how you are in the world. And I know I want to make sure that people also understand that not being bitter is not the same as like not being impacted by all this time in prison. You were incredibly traumatized, right? And you have had tons of struggles around, PTSD and feeling sick, and, I mean, so I just want to make sure people aren't hearing I'm not bitter as, this is fine, right? I mean, you suffered. I mean, it makes it even more. Yeah, you were totally traumatized, and it makes it even more remarkable that you are, so insanely decent. And at one point, I remember when I was writing, I remember, putting all these pieces together and really getting it, like all of a sudden the good guys and the bad guys in my naive story from 17 had gotten completely mixed up, so that, like all of a sudden the bad guys were the prosecutors and the DA and, the people that are supposed to be supporting us and helping us, and we had been told these guys are the bad guys, and to have, my message is question that every step of the way, question it. Not okay.
Amy, sorry, go ahead, Isaac.
No, I was just agreeing with Amy.
Yeah. Amy, I think your slide had something, some folks have asked about organizations that remain committed in doing this work of identifying and helping free people who've been wrongly incarcerated. MHS will share that. So again, this program should be up in the next week or two, and we'll include that information along with it there as well.
Yeah. And I think particularly for people in Maine, there is a branch called the New England Innocence Project that I have been in touch with. I think one or more of their folks are going to be are probably on tonight. And that is an organization that is particularly working in the greater New England area for trying to help people who have been wrongly convicted in our neck of the woods. So I highly recommend them.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both again. This is a story that's so rich. It's like music or a gospel or a piece of literature. And I'm so thankful that it's recorded, because I feel I want to go back into it and listen to it again and be with you both again and spend that time just in this. So I want to thank you again for what you've given us this night. You know, I'm also mindful that here we are in April, we're still coming out of a pandemic, and that we're still, what, 4, 5, 6 months away from the publication. All of a sudden, you know, as these little sprigs of optimism come, all of a sudden I'm visualizing Isaac making a trip for a proper in-person book event this fall in September, when Maine is at its most beautiful, where we can all embrace and thank you and be together in person and break some bread and just continue the conversation. But you know, so we're hopeful that Maine can host you at some point, Isaac, and show our.
I would love that.
Yeah. I can't wait to show him Maine. So, you know, definitely we've talked about that. So, you know, sign us up.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you to everybody who has joined us. We had a couple hundred people this evening, and we so appreciate your interest. As Amy and Isaac said, take this story, wallow in it, spend some time, think about it, share it. And I think, again, your grace, you know, just makes me think, in this really charged political environment, the greatest thing we can all, each individually, bring is calm, grace, the ability to listen to people and to kind of not sit passively by. So thank you, Isaac and Amy, and thank you to everybody who joined us. Have a great evening. And again, this is an ongoing conversation. There'll be a lot of programming here at MHS that really tries to help people get their heads around and learn and get informed. And I hope you'll be with us throughout the year on an ongoing basis. So thank you, and happy spring. Get vaccinated, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.